Some leaders change history, but a very rare few actually forge a nation out of chaos and war. That's the story we're diving into today, the story of the warrior king Kamehameha the Great and the birth of the Hawaiian kingdom. It's a huge question, right? How does that even happen? It usually takes incredible ambition, some strategic genius, and a will so strong it can literally bend the future. For the Hawaiian Islands, that story is so epic, it almost sounds like a myth. And you guessed it, like all the best legends, this one kicks off not just with a man, but with a destiny that was foretold. A sign that someone special, a great unifier, was on their way. So let's get into it. This is the story of a young chief who wasn't even called Kamehameha yet, and the unmistakable signs that pointed to, well, an absolutely incredible future. His birth name was actually Paea, and you have to picture the world he was born into. It was total chaos. The islands were fractured, ruled by chiefs who were constantly at war. His birth was seen as such a threat that he had to be hidden away as a baby to survive. But that prophecy we mentioned, it was already in motion. So he grows up, becomes this incredibly formidable warrior in his uncle's court. And then two things happen, two major events that basically put him on a path that was impossible for anyone to ignore. And these weren't just, good job moments. People saw them as signals, signs from the gods themselves. First up, the Naha stone. This thing was a massive volcanic boulder, and an ancient prophecy said that whoever could move it would be the one to unite all the islands. Well, the young Paea didn't just nudge it, he lifted the entire thing and flipped it over. Can you imagine seeing that? Then, as if that wasn't enough, when his uncle died, he inherited the duty of being the guardian for Kukailimoku, the literal god of war. So, in the eyes of the people, he now had the physical proof and the divine authority to rule. That's a powerful combination. Okay, so with prophecy as his tailwind, he gets down to business. And this wasn't an overnight thing. We're talking about decades of brutal, strategic work to turn that prophecy into a cold, hard reality. And his campaign was just relentless, an island-by-island takeover. You can see it here. He starts in 1782, locks down his home island, then launches invasions of Maui and Oahu. But what's really fascinating is the last piece of the puzzle, Kauai. After nearly 30 years of nonstop war, he brings the final island into his kingdom, not with force, but through negotiation. It just goes to show he wasn't only a warrior, he was a sharp diplomat too. So you have to wonder, what was his secret? I mean, how did one guy pull this all off? He definitely wasn't the only powerful chief around, and his rivals fought back with everything they had. The answer, and this is where the genius comes in, was all about mixing the old with the new. This is it. This is where he outplayed everyone. He had this massive, traditional fleet of nearly 1,000 war canoes, but then he puts Western cannons and muskets on them, a total game changer. He also got two Westerners, John Young and Isaac Davis, to be his advisors, giving him a massive edge in tactics and technology. He was a brilliant strategist who knew how to use every single tool at his disposal. But let's be clear, this unification was incredibly violent, and his conquest of Oahu ended with one of the most famous and frankly horrifying battles in all of Hawaiian history. The end of that battle really comes down to a single terrible number, over 700. Just let that sink in for a second. What does that number even represent? That's how many of Oahu's defending warriors were driven right off the 1,000-foot-high cliffs of the Nuuanu. Kamehameha's forces had them completely trapped. Their choice was to surrender or go over the edge. It was a victory so absolute, so devastating, that it completely broke the back of the resistance. All right, so the fighting is mostly over. But winning a war and actually running a kingdom are two completely different skill sets, right? Now, Kamehameha had to pivot. He had to transform from a conqueror into a king who could hold it all together. And this one sentence, this says it all. This quote comes from his most famous law, and it shows this profound change in his thinking, from a warrior who raids to a king who protects. The law is called the Kanawai Mamalahoi, or the law of the splintered paddle. And this is huge. I mean, it's considered one of the first humanitarian laws in history, guaranteeing safety for civilians during a war. And the story of why he created it is just incredibly personal. So get this story. Years before, during a raid, a younger Kamehameha is chasing two fishermen when his foot gets stuck in some lava rock. One of the fishermen turns around, grabs a canoe paddle, and smashes it over his head. The paddle shatters, and they leave him for dead. Fast forward, Kamehameha is king. He finds that fisherman. You'd expect revenge, right? Nope. He apologizes. He admits that he was the one in the wrong for attacking innocent people. Then he gives the man land and creates this law to make sure no one would ever have to suffer that way again. Wow. So after uniting the islands and establishing his laws, the great warrior king enters his final years and leaves behind one last incredible mystery for everyone to puzzle over. He went back home to the Big Island, living out his last days in peace as the undisputed king of the nation he had forged through fire and blood. But, like I said, the end of his life was really not the end of his story. You see, when he died, an ancient custom called hunakele was followed. The whole idea was to protect a chief's mana, their spiritual power, which was believed to live on in their bones. To stop any rivals from stealing that power, the body had to be hidden somewhere nobody could ever find it. And his friends did their job perfectly. After he died in 1819, his bones were taken to a secret location, and that secret died with them. Think about that. For over 200 years, people have searched, but the final resting place of the great unifier of Hawaii remains one of the island's most profound mysteries. So how do we look back on him? A ruthless conqueror who crushed his rivals? Or a visionary leader who brought peace and law to a broken people? The truth is, he had to be both. And in that complex journey, from the young warrior Paea to the great King Kamehameha, we find the very story of how the Kingdom of Hawaii was born.